The StG-44 is a German assault rifle developed during World War II that was the first of its kind to see major deployment and is considered by many historians to be the first modern assault rifle. It is also known under the designations MP-43 and MP-44. The StG-44 was the first successful weapon of its class, and the concept had a major impact on modern infantry small arms development. By all accounts, the StG-44 fulfilled its role admirably, particularly on the Eastern Front, offering a greatly increased volume of fire compared to standard infantry rifles and greater range than submachine guns. In the end, it came too late to have a significant effect on the outcome of the war. Description: MP-43, MP-44, and StG-44 were different designations for what was essentially the same rifle with minor updates in production. The variety in nomenclatures resulted from the complicated bureaucracy in Nazi Germany. Developed from the MKB-42H machine carbine, the StG-44 combined the characteristics of a carbine, submachine gun, and automatic rifle. StG is an abbreviation of Sturmgewehr. According to the legend, the name was chosen personally by Adolf Hitler for propaganda reasons and literally means storm rifle, as in to storm an enemy position, although some sources dispute that Hitler had much to do with coining the new name besides signing the order. After the adoption of the StG-44, the English translation assault rifle became the accepted designation for this type of infantry small arm. Over the course of its production, there were minor changes to the butt end, muzzle nut, shape of the front sight base and stepping of the barrel. The rifle was chambered for the 7.92A, 33mm Kurz cartridge. This shorter version of the German standard rifle round, in combination with the weapon's selective fire design, provided a compromise between the controllable firepower of a submachine gun at close quarters with the accuracy and power of the carabiner 98K bolt-action rifle at intermediate ranges. While the StG-44 had less range and power than the more powerful infantry rifles of the day, Army studies had shown that few combat engagements occurred at more than 300 m and the majority within 200 m. Full-power rifle cartridges were excessive for the vast majority of uses for the average soldier. Only a trained specialist, such as a sniper, or soldiers equipped with machine guns which fired multiple rounds at a known or suspected target could make full use of the standard rifle round's range and power. The Sturmgewehr's accuracy is excellent for a weapon of its type. Its effective range is about 400 yards, although the Germans claim in their operating manual that the normal effective range is about 650 yards. The leaf sight is graduated up to 800 meters. The fire selector is located above and to the rear of the safety lever, protruding slightly on either side of the housing. For single shots, the lever protrudes from the left side so that the letter E will be visible. For automatic fire, the lever protrudes from the right side so that the letter D will be visible. Automatic fire was advised only in emergencies. This was mainly to make sure that the regular soldier didn't waste his ammunition spraying at targets, but instead fired in short accurate bursts to achieve maximum accuracy and effect. The StG-44's receiver was made of heavy stamped and welded steel, as were other contemporary arms such as the MP-40 and MG-42. This made for a fairly heavy rifle, especially one firing an intermediate power cartridge. Difficulties with fabrication, the need to use available non-priority steels, and the exigencies of war resulted in a heavy receiver. U.S. War Department publications state, all things considered, the Sturmgewehr remains a bulky, unhandy weapon, comparatively heavy and without the balance and reliability of the US M1 carbine. Its design appears to be dictated by production rather than by military considerations. Though far from a satisfactory weapon, it is apparent that Germany's unfavorable military situation makes necessary the mass production of this weapon, rather than of a machine carbine of a more satisfactory pattern. The British were also critical, saying that the receiver could be bent and the bolt locked up by the mere act of knocking a leaning rifle onto a hard floor. Many of these criticisms are more a testimonial of the Allied aversion rather than an accurate view of the weapon's characteristics, which were proven highly effective during combat in the war. History, background. In the late 19th century, small arms cartridges had become able to fire accurately at long distances. Smokeless powder propelling small jacketed bullets were lethal out to 2,000 meters. This was beyond the range a shooter could engage a target with open sights, as a man-sized target would be completely blocked by the front sight blade. Only units of riflemen firing in salvos could hit grouped soft targets at those ranges. That fighting style was taken over by the widespread introduction of machine guns to make use of the powerful cartridges to suppress the enemy at long range. Weapons for short range were semi-automatic pistols, and later automatic submachine guns, firing small pistol rounds. The gap in cartridge ranges caused research into creating an intermediate round. This type of ammunition was being considered as early as 1892, but militaries at the time were still fixated on increasing the maximum range and velocity of bullets from their rifles. In the spring of 1918, Hauptmann Piderat, part of the Gupra 1/4 Funds Commission of the German General Staff in Berlin, submitted a paper arguing for the introduction of an intermediate round in the German army with a suitable firearm. He pointed out that firefights rarely took place beyond 800 meters, about half the 2 km range of the 7.92A, 57 mm round from a Mauser Model 1898 or Maxim MG08. A smaller, shorter, and less powerful round would save materials, allow soldiers to carry more ammunition, and increase firepower. Less recoil would allow semi-automatic or even fully automatic select-fire rifles, although in his paper he called it a Maschinenpistole. The German army showed no interest, as it already had the MP-18 to fire 9mm pistol rounds and did not want to create a new cartridge. In 1923, the German army set out requirements for a Mauser 98 replacement. It had to be smaller and lighter than the Mauser, have similar performance out to 400 meters, and have a magazine with a 20 or 30 round capacity. Swiss company Rheinische Westverkehrensiedliche Sprengstoff experimented with rounds in the 1920s, and German companies developing intermediate ammunition for aerial machine guns showed interest. Development of the future infantry rifle did not start until the 1930s. RWS offered 2 rounds, one with a 7mm bullet and one with an 8mm bullet, both in a 46mm case. German company Deutsche Waffen- und Munitionsfabriken had the 7A, 39.1 mm round, and Gustav Genschow and Company proposed a 7.75A, 39.5 mm round. Jecko's automatic carbine was the Model A35, a further development of the SG-29 semi-automatic rifle. The weapon was complicated and unsafe to handle. The German government started its own intermediate round and weapon program soon after. German ammunition maker Polt of Magdeburg was commissioned to develop the rounds in April 1938 and signed a contract with the Heereswaffenamt. At the same time, the HWA contracted StG Hernal of Seoul to create a weapon for the round. HWA requirements were for a rifle that was shorter and with equal or less weight to the Kar 98K and as accurate out to 400 meters. And B select fire with a rate of fire under 450 RPMs. It should be rifle grenade compatible, reliable, maintainable, and have a straightforward design. 50 rifles were to be delivered for field testing in early 1942. At the start of the Second World War, German infantry were equipped with weapons comparable to those of most other military forces. A typical infantry unit was equipped with a mix of bolt-action rifles and some form of light or medium machine guns. One difference from other armies was the emphasis on the machine gun as the primary infantry weapon. In contrast, Allied doctrine centered around the rifleman, with machine guns employed as support and point defense weapons. German units tended to be machine gun heavy, carrying more ammunition for the machine gun than for the rifles. Using belt ammunition for their more modern section-level weapons to maintain a higher rate of fire. And generally thinking of the rifle as a support weapon. Although newer rifle designs had been studied on several occasions, the infantry squad primarily centered around the machine gun. One problem with this mix was that the standard rifles were too large to be effectively used by mechanized and armored forces, where they were difficult to maneuver in the cramped spaces of an armored vehicle. Submachine guns such as the MP-28, MP-38, and MP-40 were issued to augment infantry rifle use and increase individual soldiers' firepower, but suffered from a distinct lack of range and accuracy beyond 100 meters. A small fast-firing weapon would have been useful in this role, but again the need did not seem pressing. The issue arose once again during the invasion of the Soviet Union. The Red Army had been in the process of replacing its own bolt-action rifles in the immediate pre-Euro war era. Increasing numbers of semi-automatic Tokarev SVT-38 and SVT-40s were reaching Red Army units, though issue was generally restricted to elite units and non-commissioned officers. Submachine guns were extremely widespread, and issued on a far larger scale. Some Soviet rifle companies were completely equipped with PPSH-41 submachine guns. This experience with high volumes of handheld automatic assault fire forced German commanders to rethink their small arms requirements. The German army had been attempting to introduce semi-automatic weapons of its own, notably the Q-41, but these early rifles proved troublesome in service, and production was insufficient to meet forecast requirements. Several attempts had been made to introduce lightweight machine guns or automatic rifles for these roles, but invariably recoil from the powerful 7.92x57 round made them too difficult to control in automatic fire. The German solution was to use a round of intermediate power, between that of a full-power rifle cartridge and pistol ammunition. Experiments with several such intermediate rounds had been going on since the 1930s, but had been constantly rejected for use by the Army. By 1941, it was becoming clear that action needed to be taken, and one of the experimental rounds, the Polt 8x33 Patron, was selected. To minimize logistical problems, the Mauser 8-on rifle cartridge was used as the basis for the final 7.92x33 intermediate round, which also utilized an aerodynamic Spitzer rifle bullet design. MKB-42 contracts for rifles firing the 7.92x33 round were sent to both Walther and Haenel, who were asked to submit prototype weapons under the name Maschinenpistole in a 1942 carbine. Both designs were similar, using a gas-operated action, with both semi-automatic and fully automatic firing modes. In December 1940, a prototype rifle from Haenel and Walther was tested by the HWA at Kummersdorf. It had multiple jams, several barrels got bulged, and one had a catastrophic failure. Testers blamed the results on poor quality ammunition. In February 1942, 10 million 7.92 rounds were ordered for field testing. On July 9, 1942, field and comparative tests were conducted with the ammunition and Haenel MKB-42H rifle. 3,654 shots were fired. 11 cases were separated, 67 rounds were duds, and many other rounds stovepipe jammed. Failures were blamed on the prototype stage of the weapon's design. The original prototype of Haenel's design, the MKB-42H, fired from an open bolt and used a striker for firing. The receiver and trigger housing with pistol grip were made from steel stampings, which were attached to the barrel assembly on a hinge, allowing the weapon to be folded open for quick disassembly and cleaning. The Haenel design proved superior to Walther's MKB-42W, and the Army then asked Haenel for another version incorporating a list of minor changes designated MKB-42H. One was to include lugs for mounting a standard bayonet, another to change the pitch of the rifling. A production run of these modified versions was sent to the field in November 1942, and the users appreciated it with a few reservations. Another set of modifications added a hinged cover over the ejection port to keep it clean in combat, and rails to mount a telescopic sight. A run of these modified MKB-42H.S in late 1942 and early 1943 produced 11,833 guns. Ultimately it was recommended that a hammer-firing system operating from a closed bolt similar to Walther's design be incorporated. The gas expansion chamber over the barrel was deemed unnecessary, and was removed from successive designs, as was the underbarrel bayonet lug. By March 1943, 2734 MKB-42H were accepted into service, followed by 2179 in April alone and 3044 in May. These numbers correlate well with the Haenel estimates for these months. Additionally, Haenel estimated that 3,000 were made in June and 1,000 in July, resulting in a high estimate of 12,000 units for the MKB-42H. However, the Haenel production figures from June 1943 onward do not differentiate between the last batches of MKB-42H and the first batches of MP-43/1. Other sources seem to accept only the more conservative estimate of 8,000 units. How many Walther MKB-42W were produced is even more uncertain. Some sources suggested as many as 8,000, but conservative estimates put the number at about 200, and say that most of these remained in the Walther factory until the end of the war. Production began in November 1942 and was to reach 10,000 per month by March 1943. The total number of MKB-42H manufactured between November 1942 and September 1943 was 12,000 rifles, with only about 1,000 produced per month. The MKB-42H was mostly used on the Eastern Front. By one account, the gun saw action as early as April 1942 when 35 of the only 50 prototypes then in existence were parachuted into the Coombe pocket. MP-43, MP-44, StG-44. As work moved forward to incorporate this new firing system, development temporarily came to halt when Hitler suspended all new rifle programs due to administrative infighting within the Third Reich, ordered that more, newer submachine guns were to be built and strongly disagreed with the use of the new ammunition. To keep the MKB-42H alive, the Waffenamt redesignated it into the Maschinenpistole 43 and making a few improvements, billed as an upgrade to existing submachine guns. Much time was wasted on the MP-43 design trying to make it a replacement for the Kar-98K rifle. This was eventually realized to be impossible for several reasons. The intermediate round was too weak to fire rifle grenades. It was not as accurate as the bolt-action rifle for sniping. And it was too short to use effectively for bayonet fighting. In September 1943, it was decided that the MP-43 would supplement the Kar-98K. As a result, the optical sight base, grenade launching extended muzzle thread, and bayonet lug were removed from the rifle. The designation deception was eventually discovered by Adolf Hitler, who again had the program halted. In March 1943, he permitted it to recommence for evaluation purposes only. Running for 6 months until September 1943, the evaluation produced positive results and Hitler allowed the MP-43 program to continue and in order to make mass production possible. The first MP-43s were distributed to the Waffen-SS, and then in October 1943, some were especially issued to the 93rd Infantry Division on the Eastern Front. Production and distribution continued to different troops until April 1944, where Hitler ordered it to be redesignated as the MP-44 with adding minor updates after taking some interest in the weapon tests. In July 1944, at a meeting of the various army heads about the Eastern Front, when Hitler asked what they needed, a general exclaimed, "More of these new rifles." This caused some confusion, but once Hitler was given a chance to see the MP-44 being demonstrated, he was impressed and gave it the title Sturmgewehr. Seeing the possibility of a propaganda gain, the rifle was again renamed as the StG-44, to highlight the new class of weapon it represented, translated Storm Rifle, Model 1944, thereby introducing the term. A common belief of Hitler's influence over the Sturmgewehr was that he was against an intermediate rifle round. In reality, he could have ordered the project to be cancelled entirely if he wanted to, especially if it had been hidden from him. Numerous reports and company correspondence reveal frequent presentation of the rifle's stages of development to Hitler. Rather than being opposed to the entire idea, his apprehensions seem to be from reluctance to send a new weapon to the front in too small numbers. Industry would not be able to replace some 12 million Kar-98K rifles in a short time, and the already strained logistics structure would have to support another cartridge. The Sturmgewehr was faster, easier, and less material-consuming to make than a Kar-98K, but required more complicated machinery. Without sub-suppliers to quickly produce components, companies could not manufacture sufficient numbers to replace the Kar-98K quickly. Introducing the new assault rifle in small amounts that would not make an impression on the front would be counterproductive. Hitler instead wanted to introduce it on the largest scale possible, which has been misinterpreted as his resistance to new technology. Production soon began with the first batches of the new rifle being shipped to troops on the Eastern Front. By the end of the war, a total of 425,977 StG-44 variants of all types were produced and work had commenced on a follow-on rifle, the StG-45. The assault rifle proved a valuable weapon, especially on the Eastern Front, where it was first deployed. A properly trained soldier with an StG-44 had an improved tactical repertoire, in that he could effectively engage targets at longer ranges than with an MP40, but be much more useful than the Kar-98K in close combat, as well as provide covering fire like a light machine gun. It was also found to be exceptionally reliable in the extreme cold of the Russian winter. The StG-44's rate of fire varied between 550 and 600 RPMs. The 1st Infantry Division of Army Group South and 32nd Infantry Division of Army Group North were selected to be issued the rifle, both being refitted from heavy losses on the Eastern Front. Ammunition shortages meant the 1st ID was the only division fully equipped with it. The Kar-98K was retained as a specialist weapon for sniping and launching rifle grenades. MP40s were used by vehicle and artillery crews and officers. The StG-44 was issued to all infantry soldiers. A primary use of the MP44/StG-44 was to counter the Soviet PPS and PPSH-41 submachine guns, which used the 7.62x25 and Tokarev round. These cheap, mass-produced weapons used a 71-round drum magazine or 35-round box magazine, and though shorter ranged than the Kar-98K rifle, were more effective weapons in close-quarter engagements. The StG-44, while lacking the range of the Kar-98K, had a considerably longer range than the PPS/PPSH submachine guns, a comparable rate of fire, an ability to switch between a fully automatic and a default semi-automatic fire mode, and surprising accuracy. The StG-44 was an intermediate weapon for the period. The muzzle velocity from its 419 mm barrel was 685 ams, compared to 760 ams of the Karabiner 98K, 744 ams of the British Bren, 600 ams of the M1 carbine, and 365 ams achieved by the MP40. Furthermore, the StG-44's inline design gave it controllability even on full auto. In short, the StG-44 provided the individual user with unparalleled firepower compared to that of all earlier handheld firearms, warranting other countries to soon embrace the assault rifle concept. The StG-44 was employed for accurate short-range rapid-fire shooting. The assault rifles in a squad added firepower when the machine gun had to cease fire or move. When attacking a position, Kar-98K riflemen would use grenades against it at close range, while StG-44 riflemen would fire in rapid semi-automatic or automatic bursts to keep the defenders suppressed. The magazine follower spring had a short service life, so soldiers were ordered to load no more than 25 rounds to extend the reloadable life of the spring. In January 1945, a magazine was introduced fitted with a fixed plug to restrict its capacity to 25 rounds. One unusual addition to the design was the Krumlauf, a bent barrel attachment for rifles with a periscope sighting device for shooting around corners from a safe position. It was produced in several variants, an I version for infantry use, a P version for use in tanks, versions with 30° 45° 60° and 90° bends, a version for the StG-44 and one for the MG-42. Only the 30° I version for the StG-44 was produced in any numbers. The bent barrel attachments had very short lifespans, approximately 300 rounds for the 30° version, and 160 rounds for the 45° variant. the 30-degree model was able to achieve a 35x35 cm grouping at 100 m. The Sturmgewehr was also at times fitted with the Zildjian currency T1229 infrared aiming device, also known by its codename Vampa. This device consisted of a large scope, rather like modern-style light scopes, and a large infrared lamp on top, the scope being able to pick up the infrared that would be invisible to the naked eye. The user had to carry a transformer backpack powered by a battery fitted inside the gas mask canister. Electric cables connected the power unit with the IR reflector, with the cathode ray tube mounted on the rifle imaging IR from the spotlight. The Vampa had only 15 minutes of battery life, but was able to sight within 200 meters in total darkness. A conical flash hider was added to the barrel to keep the muzzle blast from blinding the shooter. At the end of the war, Hugo Schmeisser claimed that 424,000 MP43/MP44/StG-44 rifles were built between June 1943 and April 1945 in 4 plants, 185,000 by C.G. Hanel in Seoul, 55,000 by J.P. Sauer and Son in Seoul, 104,000 in Erfurt, and 80,000 by Steyr Daimler Puch AG in Steyr, Austria. This was less than the 1.5 million ordered, and far less than the 4 million planned. Late prototypes. In a somewhat unrelated development, Mauser continued design work on a series of experimental weapons in an effort to produce an acceptable service-wide rifle for the short cartridge system. One of these prototypes, a product of the engineers at the Light Weapon Development Group at Oberndorf, was the MKB Gera currency T06, first appearing in 1942. This gun used a unique gas piston delayed roller-locked action derived from the short recoil operation of the MG-42 machine gun, but with a fixed barrel and gas system. It was realized that with careful attention to the mechanical ratios, the gas system could be omitted. The resultant weapon, the Gera currency T06H, was supposedly slated for adoption by the Wehrmacht as the StG-45M. The operating principle lived on in postwar designs from CEAMAME, CETME, and most famously, Heckler and Koch. Towards the end of the war, there were last-ditch efforts to develop cheap so-called Volksque rifles in the 7.92x33mm caliber. One of these, the VG-1-5, used a gas-delayed blowback action based on the Barnitsk system, whereby gas bled from the barrel near the chamber created resistance to the rearward impulse of the operating parts, which ceases when the projectile leaves the muzzle, allowing the operating parts to be forced rearward by the residual pressure of the cartridge case. This principle has been used most successfully in the P7 pistol. Post-1945. The Sturmgewehr remained in use with the East German Nationalvolksarmee with the designation Pi-44 until it was eventually replaced with variants of the AK-47 assault rifle. The Volksbölzer used it until approximately 1962, when it was replaced by the PPSH-41. Other countries to use the StG-44 after World War II included the Czechoslovak Socialist Republic and the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, where units as the 63rd Paratroop Battalion were equipped with it until the 1980s, when the rifles were ultimately transferred to territorial defense reserves or sold to friendly regimes in the Middle East and Africa. Argentina manufactured their own trial versions of the StG-44 made by Sitefa in the late 1940s and early 1950s, but instead adopted the FNFAL in 1955, because it used that then more common and powerful 7.62x51mm NATO round, which also lacked connections with the Third Reich. New semi-automatic reproductions of the MKB-42H, MP-43/1, and StG-44 are being manufactured in Germany today by SSD and distributed by HZA Kulmch GmbH in the original 7.92x33mm Kurz chambering. 7.92mm Kurz ammunition is currently manufactured by PRVI Partizan of Serbia. Legacy. Generally accepted as the world's first assault rifle, the StG-44's effect on post-war arms design was wide-ranging, as evidenced by Mikhail Kalashnikov's AK-47, and later in the US M16 and its variants. The Soviet Union was quick to adopt the assault rifle concept. The AK-47 used a similar-sized intermediate round and followed the design concept, but was mechanically very different. It is argued that the Russian Fedorov Avtomat was actually the first weapon to fit assault rifle criteria in 1916. The Avtomat was a short recoil selective fire rifle that used the Japanese 6.5A, 50mm Arazaka intermediate cartridge. Even so, unlike the Avtomat, the StG-44 was the first assault rifle-type weapon to be accepted into widespread service and put into mass production. In 1944 the U.S. added an automatic fire capability to the M1 carbine, and issued it as the M2 carbine with 30-round magazines, fulfilling much the same function. Kits were distributed to convert M1 carbines to M2s. The extent to which the Sturmgewehr influenced the development of the AK-47 is not clearly known. The AK-47 was not a direct copy of the German gun as it used a very different mechanism. However, tens of thousands of Sturmgewehrs were captured by the Soviets and were likely provided to Kalashnikov and his team, so it is unlikely that he did not know of it while the AK-47 was still being designed, or was influenced by it at least to observe how to improve the assault rifle concept. The 7.62A, 39mm cartridge, however, was more directly influenced by the 7.92A, 33mm cartridge used in the StG-44. In July 1943, the Soviet Technical Council of the People's Commissariat for Armament met to consider new foreign weapons firing lower-powered rounds. Two rounds that were studied were the American .30 carbine and German 7.92 Kurz, captured from MKB-42H, rifles undergoing troop trials. The meeting concluded that the 7.92 cartridge was an important development and that the Soviets needed to design a reduced-power round. The first prototype 7.62 M1943 round was created a month later, using the 7.92 Kurz design method of using the same caliber bullet as their standard rifle round in a shorter case. After World War II, many Western countries continued using their existing full-caliber rifles. Although the 7.62x51 NATO round adopted post-war was still a full-power cartridge, the trend towards the adoption of less powerful rounds was already underway in the West. For example, the M1 Garand had initially been developed for the .276 Pedersen round, a cartridge less powerful than the standard .30-06 Springfield. The U.S. Army's adoption of the M1 carbine in 1941 proved the utility of a small, handy, low-powered rifle that required little training to use effectively. Francia of Italy based the actions of both the LF-58 carbine and the LF-59 battle rifle on the StG-44. America and, later, NATO developed assault rifles along a roughly similar path by at first adding selective fire capability in a reduced-power, full-caliber cartridge. The Soviet Union lightened the AK-47 and introduced the AKM. America developed the concept of small-caliber, high-velocity bullets and further reduced the weight of their firearms with the introduction of the M16. The Soviets followed suit with the introduction of the SCHV AK-74 rifle. Users: an Argentina, a Czechoslovak Socialist Republic, a German Democratic Republic, a Israel, a France, a Kingdom of Hungary, a Federal Republic of Germany, Syrian National Coalition, a Yugoslavia, non-state groups. After World War II, the Soviet Union and other Eastern Bloc states supplied client regimes and guerrilla movements with captured German arms such as the StG-44 along with newly manufactured or repackaged 7.92x33 ammunition. French forces discovered many in Algeria and determined the origin to be from Czechoslovakia. Examples also found their way into the hands of the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War, and the PLO. It is still used in very limited numbers by militia forces in the Middle East as well as some countries in the Horn of Africa. StG-44s have been confiscated from militia groups by U.S. forces in Iraq. It was used by Lithuanian partisans during the armed resistance against the Soviet presence, 1944–1953. In August 2012, The Syrian Al-Tawhid Brigade posted a video clip on their YouTube channel showing a cache of StG-44 in their possession, which they claim to have captured amongst 5,000 StG-44 rifles and various ammunition from weapons depot in the city of Aleppo. Photos later surfaced of the rebels using them in combat. In September 2013, a photo showed a Syrian rebel with a Sturmgewehr hooked up to a remote weapon station. The gun was controlled by a wired joystick, vision was provided by a video camera mounted behind a scope, and the picture was displayed on an LCD screen. See also, Kalzada Bayer CB57, EPK machine gun, Fedora Vavtomat, HIWVSK, Volmer M35, Wimmersberg SPZKR, references. Further reading, Dieter Handrich, Sturmgewehr 44, DWJ Vol GmbH, 775p, ISBN 978-3-936632-56-9 TOC, external links, Modern Firearms, MKB42, W, StG44 infographic.